My name is Audrey Lyle. At 29, I had a career I'd built from the ground up, a house with a garden I was slowly learning to keep alive, and a marriage I still believed in. Right up until the moment, my mother-in-law set down her wine glass and looked across the Thanksgiving table with that practiced, gentle smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, "the cruise is for family, our real family." My husband Spencer was sitting 2 feet to my left. He reached for the bread basket. He didn't say a single word. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever sat at a table full of people who were supposed to love you and felt like the only stranger in the room, I want to hear from you. Because you already know exactly how this part of the story goes. I married Spencer Hartley 4 years before that Thanksgiving dinner. We met in graduate school, both finishing degrees on too much coffee and not enough sleep, bonding over bad vending machine sandwiches between back-to-back classes. He was funny. He was the kind of person who remembered small things. Your favorite order, the name of your difficult coworker, the anniversary of something that still quietly stung. I fell for him easily and completely. His family came with the package. Reuben and Norma Hartley lived 40 minutes north of us, in the house Spencer had grown up in, a 2-story with a wide front porch and a detached garage full of equipment for the landscaping business Reuben had run for over 2 decades. His older sister Cadence lived 20 minutes in the other direction with her husband Pierce, who worked in real estate and had strong opinions about very small things. The extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins stretched across 4 states, showed up at holidays in loud, cheerful waves that took some getting used to. I got used to them. I tried genuinely from the beginning. I brought food to every gathering. I remembered birthdays without being reminded. I asked Reuben about the business every time I saw him. I learned the inside jokes that required backstory to understand. I sat next to Norma when she talked about her knee, her specialist, the treatments that kept getting more expensive. I was not the daughter-in-law who held herself apart. I was the one who leaned in. Deliberately, repeatedly, with real effort. What I didn't see, not clearly, not all at once, was the shape of what I was leaning into. The financial piece started so quietly I barely registered it happening. The first time, Spencer mentioned that Reuben was short on a piece of equipment. A trailer, nothing enormous, $12,000. And could we help, just this once? They'd sort it out after the spring season picked up. We did. I didn't think twice. Then Norma's knee surgery required a specialist her insurance didn't fully cover, and the gap was nearly $4,000, and I wrote that check the same afternoon Spencer mentioned it. These were acts of love. I thought of them that way. I thought of them as what you do for people who are your family. Then came Cadence and Pierce's house. They came to us 6 weeks before closing, apologetically, gratefully, saying it was just timing. Pierce's commission check was coming but not fast enough, and could we loan them $55,000 for the down payment, just until things cleared. We had a signed agreement. The commission came. We received one partial payment of $8,000, then quiet, not another transfer, not another mention. Spencer's student loans were a slower erosion. We'd merged our finances when we married, and his deferment periods kept ending while his income stayed uneven. I covered the minimums, then the balances. Somewhere in the middle of year 2, I was paying the whole thing down myself, while also carrying most of the mortgage, because my salary was the reliable column, and we both understood that without ever quite saying it out loud. There was the family vacation fund. Norma started collecting every year. Contributions from each household toward a shared trip. I put in $6,000 the first year because it felt like belonging, like buying a seat at the table in the best possible way. I did it the next 2 years too. We went on one trip together. It was fine. I am a senior financial analyst. I work with numbers for a living. But I had never laid all of this out in a single column and added it up. I had thought of each thing as its own separate story, not as a pattern, not as a sum. That mistake would cost me some time before I corrected it. The subtle signs were there though. I talked myself out of all of them. Cadence's Instagram had hundreds of posts. Family time, Hartley Thanksgiving, my people. And in 4 years of marriage I appeared in exactly 2 of them, both times at the edge of a group shot, half out of frame. Norma's Christmas cards were addressed to Spencer and family on the envelope, but the handwritten note inside always read, "Dear Spencer." Reuben gave a speech at his 60th birthday dinner, a real one, warm and unscripted, going through each of his children and what they meant to him. He looked at Cadence. He looked at Spencer. He even looked at Pierce, who had been in the family 8 months longer than I had. He didn't look at me. Under the table, Spencer squeezed my hand and said, "You know how he is." I said yes, I know, I meant it. I kept meaning it for 4 more years until I couldn't anymore. On the Thursday before Thanksgiving, I'd made 2 dishes from scratch and spent most of Sunday on them. The Hartley house smelled like roasting meat and butter when we arrived at noon, and for a while the day was easy, comfortable, and noisy, and the specific kind of warm that used to make me feel like I'd found something real. Reuben was in good form. Cadence and I had a genuine conversation about a show we'd both been watching. Pierce said something that actually made me laugh. I remember noticing how good it felt and thinking, this is why you keep showing up. Then dinner, and the cruise. Norma had been hinting at it all afternoon. By the time she laid it out fully, The dates, the ship, 7 nights, the whole family on one deck. Everyone at the table was leaning in. I started asking about cabin categories. Whether they'd looked into booking early for better rates. I mentioned I was good at researching excursion packages, and would be glad to put something together. That's when Norma set down her wine glass. "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice was soft, the way you'd break news to someone you were genuinely fond of. "This is really for the Hartleys. Just the family, you understand. Real family." I looked at Spencer. He was looking at the breadbasket, his hand moved toward it slowly. "I'm Spencer's wife," I said, keeping my voice even. "I've been part of this family for 4 years. Cadence tilted her head, that specific tilt she has when she's about to say something that will make you feel foolish for not already agreeing. "It's not about paperwork, Audrey. It's just a Hartley thing. You know what Mom means," she said it gently, like she was doing me a favor by explaining. "It's intimate. It's blood family." Pierce nodded across the table. "Nothing personal, genuinely." I waited. The table waited, the sound of silverware, the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Spencer refilled his glass. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I said I had an early meeting Monday and needed to get going. I thanked Norma for dinner. I went around the table and kissed Spencer on the cheek. I walked out through the front door, sat in my car in the driveway, and stayed there for 6 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Nobody came out after me. Spencer came home 2 hours later. He said they hadn't meant it the way it sounded. He said Cadence sometimes phrased things wrong. He said his mother was old-fashioned about these things. Not malicious. Could we please not turn it into something it wasn't? I didn't argue. I said I was tired. I went to bed. He didn't push. He didn't apologize either. The next 3 days I went through the motions. Work, dinner, the ordinary routines of a shared life, while something quieter and colder was settling in the background. I thought about the toast at Ruben's birthday, the Christmas cards, the Instagram photos. All those small moments I'd explained away, one at a time, until they'd filled up a room I hadn't realized I was standing in. 3 days after Thanksgiving at my desk, my phone buzzed on the corner of my keyboard. It was Ruben. "Hey, sweetheart. Things a little tight this month with some of Norma's follow-up copays and a few home repairs before winter hits. Any chance you could transfer $7,500 this week? We'll sort it out after the new year. No rush. You're a lifesaver." I read it 3 times, then I read it again. I went to my messages from September, found the one where Ruben had written out the cruise plan, spelled it out enthusiastically. "Whole family together for the big one." And I screenshotted both. I put them side by side and stared at the screen for a moment. Then I replied with just the screenshots and one line underneath. I thought Hartley finances were family only too. Must have gotten confused. I turned my phone face down on my desk and went back to my work. An hour later, Leona stopped by my office and closed the door. She looked at me for a second. "Your face," she said. It wasn't a question. I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, the way she gets when she's actually thinking rather than preparing to respond. Then she said, "Audrey, how much have you actually given this family? Not individually, total." I didn't have an answer. I'd never let myself build that column. That night I opened every record I kept and started. Ruben's equipment loans, the trailer, then a storage addition the following year, then an emergency repair the spring after that. $43,000. Not a single repayment, not a payment plan proposed, not a conversation initiated about it. Norma's medical expenses. I'd started paying her specialist's billing portal directly in year 2, after I heard her tell Spencer she might have to cut the treatments back to save money. I'd done it quietly. I hadn't told anyone. $38,000, across 3 years. And it had never once come up in conversation, because I'd never raised it and they'd never asked where the invoices went. Cadence and Pierce's down payment loan. $55,000, one partial payment, then nothing. We still had the signed agreement in a folder in my home office. Spencer's student loans, which I'd been absorbing as our expense while calling it that to myself so it felt less like what it was. $61,000. The vacation fund, $18,000 over 3 years. The smaller items, a car repair for Cadence, the winter Pierce's accounts were tied up in a closing. A piece of medical equipment Norma's insurance denied. Holiday gifts I'd bought for both of us when Spencer forgot. And I didn't want the family to think badly of him. $27,000. The total sat on my screen in a plain spreadsheet cell, $242,000. I sat with it for a long time. I didn't move. I could hear the heat clicking on in the walls, the specific domestic sounds of the house I had largely paid for, the house I had built a life in, $242,000. And they couldn't include me in a cruise announcement. They couldn't let a seat exist for me at the table, without it being a category to be explained. I texted Leona at 2 in the morning. "I'm not the bank. I've been acting like I'm the bank," she replied immediately. "No, you've been acting like your family. There's a difference." I didn't sleep. In the morning I called Spencer from my car before going into work. I wanted to hear his voice. "Did you know about the cruise plan before Thanksgiving dinner?" I asked. A pause, longer than it needed to be. We'd talked about it a little. "So you knew." I said it flat, not loud. You sat there and let me find out like that, in front of everyone. I didn't want to make it into a thing at the table. It was already a thing. They'd planned it. You knew and you said nothing. He didn't have an answer for that. The silence said enough. That evening the messages started. Cadence, calling it a misunderstanding, suggesting I was being too sensitive, that the family was worried about me and my reaction was making things harder than they needed to be. Pierce, in careful phrasing, mentioning that some of the loan documents were informal enough that enforcement would be complicated and potentially unpleasant for everyone. Ruben called twice and left nothing. Whatever he'd wanted to say, he'd decided to hold. Norma called once. She left a voicemail. Her voice was quieter than I expected. I know Thanksgiving got uncomfortable. I'd like to talk when you're ready, please. That was all. No defense, no framing, no explanation, just that. It was the only message that sounded like a person. I retained my own financial attorney the next morning and started separating accounts, flagging transfers by origin, documenting every outbound payment with dates and amounts. My attorney didn't offer opinions, but at one point she looked up from her screen and said, "You've been carrying a significant load here." I told her I knew. Then, I wrote the email. I sent it to Ruben, Norma, Cadence, and Pierce, with Spencer copied. I documented every transfer, the date, the amount, the stated purpose, whether there was a signed agreement, and what repayment, if any, had been received. I attached the agreements we had. I noted the unsigned contributions with bank records as corroboration. At the end I wrote, "I have been glad to support this family. I would have kept doing it. I would have been gladder still to simply be considered part of it. Thanksgiving made the terms of my membership very clear. I am adjusting my financial involvement accordingly. All outstanding loans are due within 60 days, per the agreements on file." Then, on its own line, the bank is closed. Spencer read it standing at the kitchen counter. He put his coffee down. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, that was a hard email to send. It was a harder Thanksgiving to sit through. He nodded slowly. I should have said something at the table. Yes, you should have. 4 days later they came over, a Sunday afternoon. All 4 of them on our front porch, which was a particular choice given what our front porch had cost. I let them in and stayed standing. Ruben opened, his voice aimed somewhere between apologetic and pressured. Norma had misspoken. Of course I was part of the family. It was a miscommunication. Cadence could have phrased things better. She didn't misspeak, I said. She said real family. She confirmed it when I pushed back. Pierce agreed. Spencer said nothing. That's not one person phrasing something wrong. That's a position everyone at the table shared. Cadence's composure shifted. You've always positioned yourself as slightly separate, Audrey. That's not something we did to you. I learned your inside jokes. I showed up to every holiday for 4 years. I brought food. I funded your down payment. I covered your mother's treatments quietly for 3 years without telling anyone, because I didn't want her to worry. I was not separate. I let that sit for a moment. I was trying. There's a difference. Pierce leaned forward in his chair. Some of those informal transfers have been reviewed by my financial attorney, I said. The signed agreements are enforceable. The unsigned ones are corroborated by bank records and transfer timestamps. You're welcome to pursue it if you'd like. I'd genuinely welcome the opportunity to show a judge the full picture. Ruben's voice dropped the conciliatory register. The business is behind. Cadence and Pierce are stretched. We counted on your help staying consistent. Without it we could lose the house, Audrey. The actual house. I know, I said. You've been counting on my money for years while telling me, with your behavior, and eventually with your words, that I wasn't really family. I've been patient about that for a long time. I looked at him steadily. I'm done being patient. What do you want? Cadence demanded. What would actually satisfy you here? An apology that isn't about the money, I said. That's all it ever was. A seat at the table that didn't come with an asterisk, someone to say something at that Thanksgiving dinner before I had to leave. I paused. You don't have that to give, so we're here instead. Spencer stood next to me when they left. He'd been mostly quiet through the whole conversation. But he stood there, which mattered, even if it had taken him too long. At the door, Ruben pointed at me. He said family didn't do this to family. You're right, I said. They don't. The weeks after were the complicated kind. Spencer and I went to therapy, separately first, then together. There were things that needed to be said out loud that had been accumulating for 4 years. The ways he'd let me carry things. The ways I'd allowed myself to carry them without naming what it cost me. There were nights I didn't know what the marriage was going to look like on the other side of all of it, but Spencer did the work. It was imperfect, and it was slow. But he did it, and I noticed. In March, Leona and I took 4 days at a cabin in the mountains. It was the first time in years I'd gone somewhere without running calculations in the background about who I was covering back home. I slept more than 8 consecutive hours, 2 nights in a row. I hadn't realized how long that had been gone until it came back. The Hartley family registered the financial shift quickly. Ruben's spring season ran into real difficulty. They sold the boat. Cadence and Pierce went quiet on social media in a way that said more than anything they'd said out loud. The anniversary cruise happened in a reduced version. Shorter, smaller, 3 cabins. I was not on it. I didn't particularly want to be. Spencer's cousin Harlow called me in April. She'd heard a version of events from Norma's side and wanted to hear mine. I told her. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's not right. That's not how this family is supposed to work." It wasn't a small thing hearing that. It was the first time someone with the last name, Hartley, said out loud what I'd needed someone to say for a long time. Norma reached out in May. She asked to meet. I said yes. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop near her house, and before I'd taken my coat off, she said, "I failed you. I knew it when it was happening, and I let it happen anyway." It was the first apology from any of them that sounded true. Not about the money, not about the family situation, about me at that table on Thanksgiving, about the Christmas cards, about the toast at Ruben's birthday that didn't include me. I believed her. I didn't open the financial door back up. Every boundary I'd set, I kept where I'd put it. But I called Norma's specialist billing office quietly and made an arrangement to cover her ongoing co-pays. Just hers. Just the woman who had finally looked at me and said something real, without a reason to. Harlow came to our place for the 4th of July. Her husband, their 2 kids, a cooler and a loud afternoon that ran late into the evening. It was one of the better days I'd had in a long time. Easy and warm and unguarded, the way I'd always thought family gatherings could feel. Spencer and I are still together. It is a different marriage than it was before Thanksgiving, in the ways that honest marriages change when people finally say what's true. He is closer to what I needed than he was a year ago. I think he carries that knowledge carefully. I think it makes him better. 2 months ago, I started a small financial workshop at my firm. Free, open to anyone, specifically aimed at women who are the responsible one, the one everyone leans on, the one who writes the checks and signs the agreements, and covers the shortfalls and still shows up to dinner with something homemade. The first session had 11 people. The second had 23. In the third session, a woman started crying while I was listing the signs. She said she didn't realize it was a pattern. She thought it was just her family, just the specific shape of her particular situation. It is never just your family. Last spring, one evening after work, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine and watched the garden I'd been slowly learning. There are lavender plants along the fence now, which I've been told are nearly impossible to kill. The light was going long and gold over the yard. I thought about what I would have said to myself 4 years ago. In that house on a wide front porch, still believing that enough effort, enough generosity, enough showing up would eventually earn me a real place at the table. I would have said, the generosity that costs you your dignity is not generosity, it's fear dressed as love, know the difference. I would have said, when someone tells you who you are to them, believe them the first time, not the 10th. I would have said, you are not a bank, you are not a resource, you are a person, and being a person means you get to set the terms of what you give and to whom. Drawing that line is not cruelty, it is not petty, it is necessary. If you are the one quietly holding everyone else up, while standing outside the family photo. I see you. I know the specific arithmetic of giving more than you have while being valued less than you deserve. I know what it costs to keep showing up to a table where your seat doesn't quite exist. You are allowed to put it down. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to draw a hard line with people you loved? What finally made you do it? I read every single comment, and whatever you're carrying tonight, you are not carrying it alone.